Helen's boss, Thomas, was one of those men who went around puffing up his chest, calling himself an alpha like it was a title he'd earned. He thrived on control, making sure everyone knew how important he thought he was. And the worst part? He had the audacity to hit on Helen, my wife, like our marriage didn't even register on his radar. The sheer arrogance of it set a fire in me I could barely contain. I couldn't wrap my head around how someone could be so brazen. That evening, I came home, expecting the usual routine. Helen should have been there already, the smell of dinner wafting through the house, like it always was. But this time, something felt off. She wasn't home, and it was getting late. A sense of unease started creeping in, like my gut was trying to warn me before my head caught up. Just as I reached for my phone to call her, it buzzed in my hand. "Hey, still at work?" I asked, keeping my tone steady even though worry was churning under the surface. "Yeah, but I'm heading home now. I've got a surprise for you," she said, her voice light but distant, like something was off. "Should I go ahead and start dinner or order something?" I offered, trying to shake the uneasy feeling building inside me. "No need. We won't have time for that tonight," she replied quickly, then hung up before I could ask anything else. I stood there, more confused than ever. About 20 minutes later, she walked through the door, and one look at her hit me like a punch to the gut. She looked disheveled. Her clothes were wrinkled, her stockings were gone, her makeup smudged, and her hair was a mess, like she'd been through the ringer. "Tough day?" I asked casually, trying to sound normal while my eyes took in every little detail. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she came up to me, wrapped her arms around me, and held on longer and tighter than usual. Then, in a soft voice, she whispered, "You know I love you more than anything, right? You'd do anything for me, wouldn't you?" I nodded automatically, memories of all the times I'd bent over backward to make her happy flashing through my mind. But something in her tone didn't sit right, like she was laying the groundwork for something she wasn't saying outright. Then, out of nowhere, she started talking about Thomas, her boss, and these deep conversations they'd been having at work. It wasn't just water cooler talk either. She explained that he'd been sharing his views on relationships and roles, and it sounded like he'd really gotten into her head. He'd been pushing this idea that relationships work better when the man steps back, giving the woman more control, and apparently, it had struck a chord with her. "You know, you let me make a lot of the little decisions, where we vacation, what we eat for dinner, and I've always appreciated that," she said, her eyes locked on mine. "But Thomas, he's been saying some relationships are stronger when the man isn't in the driver's seat. It's made me think, Mason. It's made me wonder if there's something I've been missing." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Helen, I've never had an issue with you making decisions about the day-to-day stuff. But when it comes to the big things, our house, our finances, that's always been a partnership. It's not about control. It's about us being equals. That's what marriage is supposed to be, isn't it?" "Maybe," she said, her voice softer now, almost dreamlike. "But Thomas has a different way of seeing things. He thinks men like you, kind, supportive, are naturally better at taking a back seat. He's been sharing these ideas, and they've really made me think." My stomach turned. Somehow, Thomas, with all his swagger and overconfidence, had gotten inside her head and was now twisting her perspective on us. "What are you saying, Helen? Where is this going?" She hesitated, and my chest tightened. "Thomas has been, well, he's been very direct with me lately. He's strong, confident, and hard to ignore. I know it's wrong, but I found myself caught up in it. It's been exciting." The room suddenly felt suffocating. "Exciting?" I echoed, barely able to keep my voice steady. She broke eye contact, looking down as if the floor had the answers. "Lately, I've been thinking about him a lot, Mason, and he said something I've been considering. He thinks maybe you'd be open to it. Maybe you'd even enjoy watching. And if not, he believes it would still bring us closer, make us feel more alive, more connected, after." I stared at her, waiting for some kind of punchline, some indication that this was all some twisted joke. But it wasn't. She was dead serious. "Helen," I said finally, my voice shaking with disbelief, "are you actually suggesting this? Do you honestly think I'd be okay with any of this? She met my gaze, her eyes almost pleading. Mason, I know you love me, and I know you want me to be happy. I really believe this could take us to a new place, something we've never experienced before. My stomach knotted as I forced myself to ask the question I dreaded most. Helen, have you already done something with him? No, Mason, I haven't slept with him, she said, though there was a slight pause in her voice that made me doubt her. But we've crossed some lines. I've touched him, talked with him in ways I shouldn't have. A wave of nausea rolled through me. And he's here? Right now? Yes, she admitted softly, almost as if she were ashamed. He's waiting in the driveway. We're going to talk, and then he's coming inside. You can watch if you want. Afterward, I'll come back to you, and you can have me however you want. Disgust rose in my throat, sharp and bitter. Are you out of your damn mind, Helen? I snapped, my voice barely restrained. The thought of being with you after him makes my skin crawl. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't back down. I know it sounds crazy, Mason, but I truly believe you'll end up loving it. Helen's expression shifted to one of determination, her eyes gleaming with a strange enthusiasm. Once you see how this makes us stronger, you'll understand. This could be incredible for us. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as fury boiled just beneath the surface. No, Helen, absolutely not. You're stepping over a line, and I'm telling you right now, send him away. For a moment, she looked stunned, as if she hadn't expected me to stand my ground. Then her voice softened, turning almost pleading. Mason, you've always let me have my way. Why not this time? This will be good for us, I know it. Without waiting for a reply, she turned on her heel and headed toward the stairs. Let him in when you're ready, she said over her shoulder, her tone dismissive, as if she hadn't just detonated a bomb in our lives. I stood rooted in place, her words hanging in the air like a slap. Helen. I called after her, my voice raw with emotion. I see exactly what this is now. I get it. She paused briefly on the stairs but didn't look back, leaving me standing there, grappling with the wreckage of what we once had. How could she not see the chaos she was unleashing? How could she possibly believe this nightmare was for our benefit? As anger and betrayal churned in my chest, I strode into the kitchen, my mind racing. I grabbed her keys, her phone, and the credit card we shared, tossing them onto the counter with purpose. My eyes landed on a dish towel, and an idea began to form. I pulled open a drawer, grabbed a handful of zip ties, and took the large carving knife from its block. My pulse pounded as I stepped outside to confront the man who had so brazenly inserted himself into my life. Thomas was sitting in his car, casually scrolling on his phone as if he hadn't a care in the world. He didn't notice me at first, but when he did, he flashed me a smug grin, rolling down the window like he owned the place. So, Helen filled you in, huh? He said, his tone dripping with arrogance. Don't worry, you can have her back for now, but it's only a matter of time before she's mine. Before he could finish, I swung my fist, connecting squarely with his nose. The crunch of bone breaking echoed in the still night, followed by his startled cry as blood poured from his face. I tossed him the dish towel. You're going to need this, I muttered coldly. As he fumbled to stop the bleeding, I quickly looped a zip tie around one of his wrists and secured it to the headrest of his seat. He tried to resist, but before he could recover, I opened the door and drove my fist into his gut, hitting the spot he always bragged about in his fitness rants. He doubled over, wheezing, his movements hampered by the tie. With his free hand flailing, I yanked it down and fastened it to the steering wheel, leaving him effectively immobilized. I leaned in, my voice low and menacing. So, this is what an alpha looks like? Pathetic. You messed with the wrong man, and I promise you, you'll regret it. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Ignoring his panic, I grabbed a heavy garden hose nozzle lying nearby and swung it hard against the car's side window, shattering it into jagged pieces. Glass sprayed everywhere as I smashed the windshield next, watching with grim satisfaction as it cracked into a web of fractures. I turned my attention to the headlights, destroying them with 2 swift strikes. When I was done, I circled back to his door, breathing heavily but calm. Looks like your precious car won't be taking you anywhere for a while, Thomas. He stared at me, his face a mixture of fear and pain. I leaned in closer, my voice icy and deliberate. If you try to retaliate, I will find you. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but someday. And when I do, I'll finish what I started tonight. My words hung in the air, cold and final. The choice is yours, Thomas. Decide if this is the last time you ever see me, or if you want to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. He nodded frantically, too terrified to speak. As I stepped inside, shutting the door firmly behind me, I heard Helen's voice drift down from upstairs. Thomas? Did you and Mason talk things out? The sheer obliviousness in her tone was maddening, as if she had no clue about the chaos she'd just thrown at me. Helen, I called back, forcing my voice to stay calm, though rage simmered beneath the surface. Thomas is still outside. He wants to have a word with you. Moments later, I heard her coming down the stairs. She appeared in the doorway, draped in that silk robe I'd bought her years ago, barely concealing the lingerie underneath. It was a sight that once would have stopped me in my tracks, but now it just made my stomach turn. She looked at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. What happened, Mason? Did you tell him everything's fine? Keeping my voice steady, I replied, I made it very clear what's at stake. You should go outside and talk to him yourself. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if sensing something wasn't right, but she didn't push. Without another word, she slipped through the front door and headed toward Thomas's car. The second she was outside, I sprang into action. I marched upstairs, grabbed a suitcase from the closet, and started packing her belongings with a cold, methodical efficiency. Clothes, shoes, toiletries, it all went in. I emptied her drawers, swept her makeup into a bag, and even tossed in the tennis shoes she kept by the door. My hands moved quickly, the adrenaline still coursing through me, powering every motion. When the suitcase was full, I opened the guest room window and called down to her. Helen, you're going to need this, I shouted as I shoved the suitcase through the window. It hit the driveway with a loud thud, followed by the shattering sound of glass. Her perfume bottles, no doubt. I grabbed her shoes and hurled them after, one of them narrowly missing her. She whipped around, staring up at me in shock. Mason, what the hell are you doing? Her voice trembled, her expression shifting from disbelief to raw hurt as tears welled up in her eyes. I leaned out the window, my voice flat and cold. Isn't this what you wanted, Helen? You made your choice. You picked him. Her face crumpled, and the tears began to fall freely. Mason, no. I never wanted this to hurt you. I thought this was something we could explore together, something that would make us stronger. Please, let's talk. We can fix this. I shook my head slowly, my tone as steady as steel. Helen, you've been lost in some twisted fantasy ever since you walked through that door tonight. You expected me to just go along with it like none of it mattered. I don't even know who you are anymore. But I know this, I'm done. Take your alpha to the hospital or wherever you want, but understand this. If I hear a word from anyone about what happened tonight, there will be consequences. Her shoulders slumped as she clutched the suitcase, guilt and shame written all over her tear-streaked face. Please, Mason, she whispered desperately. I'll do anything to fix this. I won't speak to Thomas again. I love you. I stared at her, unmoved. I'll pack the rest of your things. You can come back for them later. But don't come back here. And with that, I slammed the window shut, cutting off her pleas and sealing the conversation. I walked downstairs, her muffled cries echoing through the house as she called my name, begging for me to listen. I ignored it. Instead, I grabbed her purse from the kitchen counter, opened the door, and threw it at her. It hit her square in the chest and fell to the ground. She looked up at me, stunned, but I didn't say another word. I shut the door and locked it behind me. Leaning against the door, I could still hear her sobbing outside, her voice broken and desperate. Mason, please. What did you do to Thomas? Just come out and talk to me. But I was done with talking. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and cracked it open, settling into a chair at the table. As I took a long sip, the adrenaline began to ebb, leaving a hollow ache in its place. I stared out the window, watching the scene unfold in the driveway. Helen was crouched by Thomas's car, frantically sawing at the zip ties with the knife I'd left behind. Her hands were trembling, fumbling as she tried to free him. After a few tense moments, she finally succeeded, helping him into the back seat. She climbed into the driver's side, her face pale and streaked with tears. As she backed out of the driveway, she looked at the house one last time, her eyes red and full of regret. I took another sip of beer, the taste sharp and grounding. I watched her taillights fade into the distance, my mind a whirlwind of disbelief and anger. In a single night, everything I thought I knew about my wife, my marriage, and my life had been turned upside down. And as I sat there, staring into the emptiness of what was left, I wondered if I'd ever feel whole again. In the days that followed, I ignored every desperate attempt Helen made to contact me. She tried everything, calling from different numbers, leaving voicemails I didn't bother to play. None of it mattered. I didn't care what she had to say anymore. A part of me wondered if Thomas might retaliate, maybe even press charges for what I did. For days, I half expected to hear a knock at the door or see flashing lights in the driveway. But nothing happened. No police, no accusations, no consequences. I figured Thomas had enough self-preservation to avoid dragging his mess into the light. Still, I knew I couldn't avoid Helen forever. There were practical matters to deal with, and like it or not, we had unfinished business. After days of silence, I finally decided to call her back. "Be here in an hour," I told her, my voice devoid of emotion. "We need to talk." She arrived on time, standing on the porch like a shadow of the woman I'd once known. Her face was a wreck, puffy, tear-streaked, and drained of color. She hesitated for a moment, taking a shaky breath before sitting beside me on the steps. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything we hadn't said. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "Mason, I'm sorry. I don't know how I let it get this far. I don't know how I could have believed Thomas when he said you'd be open to it, that it would somehow make us stronger. Maybe it was his confidence, the way he talked like he knew everything. I see now how insane it all was. I love you. I always have. Please let me come home. I'll do anything to make this right." I kept my gaze on the horizon, my voice sharp and cold. "Tell me something, Helen. How was he in bed?" Her face went pale, and she shook her head furiously. "Mason, no. It never got to that point. Please don't even think that." I didn't respond, just stared at her, waiting for her to keep talking. She hesitated, then swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. After that night, I realized how wrong I'd been. "I swear, Mason, I never slept with him. He's terrified of you." The next day, he fired me, said he wanted nothing more to do with me. And after what you did, he ended up in the hospital for 2 nights. He told them it was a robbery. I didn't argue because I didn't want you to get in trouble. I let her words hang in the air before replying with a bitter smirk. Well, at least he finally made one smart decision. Her eyes filled with tears as she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Mason, I know I messed up, but I'm here now. I want to fix this. I want to be your wife again. I see now that you're the only one I need. Please forgive me." I took a deep breath, my words slow and deliberate. "Helen, we've been together for 5 years. The first 2, we were madly in love. The last 3, we've been building a life. And now, here we are, with you already looking for something else. Maybe you think you love me, and maybe you do in some way. But you don't respect me. If you did, you never would have entertained the idea of bringing your boss into our marriage." She tried to respond, but I cut her off, my voice sharp and unwavering. "If you respected me, Helen, you wouldn't have seen me as some kind of pushover who'd just stand by while you dragged another man into our bed. If you truly loved me, none of this would have even crossed your mind." Her tears flowed freely now, but I pressed on. "You didn't sleep with him, fine, but you still let him into our lives, into our marriage, in ways that destroyed what we had. While he was feeding you his fantasies about being an alpha, you let yourself drift from everything we built together." "Mason," she choked out, her voice breaking, "I'll never do anything like this again. I promise." I shook my head, the finality of my decision settling like a stone in my chest. It's too late, Helen. You've already crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Trust, once broken, doesn't come back. And without trust, there's no foundation left for us to stand on. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't falter. We don't have kids. The house isn't paid off. Our savings are modest. Staying with you now is a gamble I'm not willing to take. I don't trust you anymore, Helen. And worse than that, I've lost respect for you. She buried her face in her hands, her body trembling with grief. But I was done. We're getting a divorce. You can keep your car. I'll keep mine. We'll split the savings and sell the house. You can go find someone who fits the life you want. I stood, my resolve unshaken. I've already contacted a lawyer. We can do this peacefully, or you can get your own and drag it out. Either way, it's over. I'll start moving out next week so we can list the house. Mason, no, she cried, her voice raw and desperate. Please, I made a mistake, a terrible one, but don't throw us away. I love you. I was pulled into something I didn't fully understand. I looked at her one last time, my tone icy and final. Helen, there's nothing left to save. This is the end. I turned and began packing her belongings into her car, ignoring her broken pleas. She stood there, watching, her face etched with despair. But I felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, just emptiness. When I was done, I shut the door on her car and stepped back. Goodbye, Helen, I said firmly, then walked back into the house, locking the door behind me. The days that followed were eerily quiet. For years, my life had revolved around Helen, her happiness, her plans, her needs. Now, it was just me, alone in an empty house. But as the silence settled, I felt something else creeping in, a sense of relief. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was one I could rebuild on my own terms. And that, at least, felt like a new beginning. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel.